This is podcast 18, and it's really hard for me to do this one because it's dealing with my personal emotions that I had to go through with loss. We had recently lost a staff member. He came to us about 7 years ago, knocked on my door, and asked me for a job. And so he gave me some references and gave me a CD of his playing. He played music, and he became my friend. I mean, not only my friend, partner in the ministry. He actually was the first producer of the podcast and helped me get it going. Now we have a new director, and that's Jason Orr, that's doing this for us, and I really appreciate it. But we're going to talk about how I had to come to grips with the loss and death. And soon after that, we lost another man that was the chaplain of my military men's breakfast, and he was loved. And we spent a lot of time with it early years, about 7-8 months every week, counseling, because he lost his brother in the struggle he went through and the grief he went through in relationship to it. But this was a tough deal. When I found out, I'm dealing, as I've said in the other podcast, I was dealing with liver cancer and the treatment for it, and then also in a period of time when he was in the hospital, put in the hospital, had kidney failure. And so we were so worried about him. I mean, it just every day I'm calling the family and trying to get information and bugging them, and then nurse's station, and finally the nurse's station told the family for me not to call because I was just so worried about it. This is a tough deal because I pastor, and everybody thinks that pastors should get over everything immediately and find peace with what has taken place, and that's just not true. We're human. And he had become so part of what we did. Led our music in the second service, and we had all kinds of things planned for the music department. And he was excited. We're building a choir, and and I just didn't see why God would take such a vital person for what we're trying to do. And I'm not a young guy. I'm 71 years of age, and he was 65, and every morning before school started, we would spend time together and talking about ministry and things, and Auburn football, and the new coach he didn't like, and I told him I thought he was a great hire. But what do we do? What do we do? How do we get over it? How did I get over it? When we come to grief and depression and that comes our way, our mind really just gets in a rut, and it's in a rut you can't see, and everything you deal with you can't see because it's just overwhelming. A lot of people say, Pastor, you should have got over it. Well, I'm human. And he was just like family to me. We come celebrate Thanksgiving together with our family. Everybody in the ministry just loved him. Our school kids just loved him. In fact, our girl basketball team was playing, and they lost a basketball game, and it basically was because of what had taken place. They've just found out the death of the teacher, and so they couldn't overcome it. And so overcoming and dealing with reminds me of years ago when my brother and I were hunting out in the woods, and he had a CJ5 Jeep, and it got stuck in a rut, and it was deep down, and it was leaning over, and accidentally just drove into this rut and couldn't get out, and tires spinning. And what did we do? How did we get out? How were we going to get out? I definitely didn't want to walk out because there was no one in the woods because we were hunting on a weekday. And so he had what's called a high lift jack. And that high lift jack did this. It lifted up the Jeep so we can put things under the tires so we could get out of the rut. And sure enough, it lifted it up. And we put stuff underneath it, and we got out. When our minds get into a rut dealing with grief, I lost my dad, lost my mother, lost my sister, lost my grandmother, and my brother surviving of cancer, and we thought we were going to lose him about 5-6 years ago, or 10 years ago, and God has healed his body. And I wondered why God wouldn't heal my partner in the ministry. And it didn't happen. My heart was broke. But the problem is, I have to be up for everybody else when I needed to deal with what I was dealing with. It reminds me when you read Psalms, it is David being chased by Saul, his best friend's dad, was king of Israel, and he was trying to kill him. And David wrote so many things in relationship to his frustrations and feeling low and feeling trapped and feeling alone, even though had a group of men with him that were just outstanding men. But, you know, he just, in his mind, it was hard to believe that Saul, the king of Israel, was after him. And so he would verbalize himself. And I think God did this, wrote the Psalms so we could understand verbalization. He'd verbalize himself on the anguish that he was going in. You know, if we keep grief in, we keep depression in, we keep anger, we keep all those things in, it's going to come out in some kind of form. With me, my coping aid has always been food, which is not good. And the good thing, I couldn't eat food because the cancer treatment was what I needed. So I had nothing but the high lift jack I had. And the high lift jack is Jesus Christ. And you know, I'm muffling through all this, and I'm asking, and someone says you're not to question God. And I was asking God why. The very guy that came here to work with me. We were so aligned in so many things. He was now gone. It was hard. It reminds me of Paul when he was in Roman prison, in the book of Timothy, and it talks about how he felt all alone. And I have a picture of him probably sitting in that prison with his head in his hands, looking at the floor, thinking, no one cared for my soul. In fact, that's what he said. No one cared. Over in the Psalms, it says that. I looked to the left, I looked to the right, and no one cared for my soul. And everybody I dealt with, they were grieving too. So I had to give them upbeat stuff, but I was just struggling inside, having a heck of a time with it. But one Cephas came by, and Paul said he offered refreshment. So he came by a few times to encourage him. And so he had come to a place of understanding his frustration and anger. And as 3 times in the Bible it was said, he said, don't lay this at their charge. They know not what they do. We see that the man that Paul witnessed get killed, Timothy, he was stoned to death, and he looked up in the heavens and he says, God, lay this not at anybody's charge. He was thanking God for what had taken place. Paul was thanking God. Where'd they get that? They got that at the cross. At the cross, Jesus looks up into the heavens and he says, God, don't lay this at anybody's charge. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. It took days and weeks to go get over things that I was dealing with. 65 years old, that's young to me. But what is our greatest weapon? You know, in my church I have men that, I have a number of men that have lost their wives. They're very. And they were very close. Wherever you saw them, they saw their wives. And you talk to them any depth and talk to them about their wives. And I knew all their wives, they just get stuck because it's hard. And so I try to stay away from the subject unless they want me to talk to them about it. And in fact, the other day I made the mistake because my assistant pastor's wife, you know, I know for 50 years, and I was thinking about all the things she did for us in the ministry, and how what a blessing she was. And I told my assistant pastor or co-worker and co-minister in this ministry about it, and it was tough. It is tough to come with it. This, I was tough the first Sunday I preached on, back in the pulpit, but preached in the second service where he led singing. He did a fantastic job. Built a pretty good choir, and it was hard because I'm dealing with loss, and here I am every Sunday. He would come and says, you know, this is the greatest day of the week. Everything I do points to this day. I'm so happy to be in church, and that's the way I feel. And so we just related things together. We'd talk before service. He'd come in early, and we'd sit back and talk about what's going on in the choir and what we needed to do and what he needed. And so what do I do? How do we deal with it? How do I deal with my personal depression, my personal loss? Well, verbalize it. Admit it. This is hard. It's hard for me because everybody thinks a pastor's perfect. Well, if you watch my podcast, you know I'm not. You know my situation's not. And it's hard to do that. It's just hard to, but you got to verbalize it. You got to get it out. You got to talk about it. If you don't talk about it, I had no one really to talk to. No one could correlate with me, my grief, my hurt. But I have 3 sons. All of them 3 work here. Love them to death, and their families, and they just went through this major problem in my life. Have to release. This is a hard step. How do we release? You know, when I had cancer, and I talked about that when I was diagnosed with cancer, I had to thank God for that cancer because my outlook wasn't good. 15 months, no treatment, and maybe 5 years. But I was going to work every day of my life through that. Well, thank God that cancer's basically gone. But when I was in the hospital, I just had to come to grips with it. And I started verbally thanking God, even though you think, oh, well, why do I have to deal with this? Why is it taking my body toll? And I just started thanking God for the cancer. Thank you, God. In my cancer, I'm going to find people to bless, encourage. In fact, last night I got a call from a lady out of the hospital in San Francisco. And, you know, you talk to cancer patients usually, they've got not a lot of hope sometimes. And so she just couldn't believe it. You know, she couldn't believe I was up walking around doing what I'm doing. And I told her, you know, because what goes on right now, the battle inside between the radiation and the cancer, and my liver's going crazy. I told her, I'm just going to work every day I can. And when I get tired, my body gets exhausted, I'm going to go home and sleep. And basically, that's what every day this week. I worked as hard as I could, did everything I was supposed to do. And every day I went home, collapsed, and slept. The good thing is, I don't want to eat. When you sleep, your body's just ravished with, especially my stomach's ravished with pain. And so I just went home, collapsed. And she says, well, you need rest. She says, you having a problem sleeping? I said, ma'am, didn't you just hear me when I come home? I hit the bed and I'm done. And she started laughing. I said, and I was so upbeat with her. And she didn't want to get off the phone. I mean, she talked to me 15 minutes, and that was sweet. But I thank God for the cancer, because this gives me an opportunity to talk to her. And all the nurses I've witnessed to, and the doctors I've witnessed to, and they played Christian music when they're doing the procedure and putting the Y90 in me. But Paul writes in Romans, a verse that's tough when you're going through grief. He writes, all things work together for God who love the Lord. And that's tough, because when people go through that, and I've quoted that to many people that go through things in life, and it's hard for them to come to grips with it. It's hard to them to say, what purpose did God have for me? And all things work together for Him. Well, Paul also writes, he says, giving thanks, for this is the will of God concerning you. I had to give thanks for the cancer. 9 years ago, a surgeon they're repairing my back, put a screw in my nerve. For 9 years, I lived with excruciating pain. A lot of times, I couldn't walk. I had to use a walker. Sometimes I was in a wheelchair. And I just had to thank God for it. Especially when they found it was a screw and they removed it. Boy, I was really thanking God for that, because the pain was gone. What was the purpose I had to go through that? Why did I have to go through that? I don't know when I get to heaven. But it never stopped me from doing what God wanted me to do. And even in the pain. But Paul saw Timothy getting stoned to death. He was nude. And they laid the clothes, the Bible says, at Paul's feet. And they stoned him. He looked up in the heavens, and the Bible said, in the face of an angel. He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. How do we do that? How do I do that? How do I get thanks for what happened? Well, the thing that I'm going to tell you is very tough. You have to verbally thank God. Even though you don't thank God. You say, God, I thank you. And you keep saying, God, I thank you. Because you need to change your attitude. You've watched my podcast and the situation my wife's went through. And in a church, a lot of people put pressure on you about your wife. And my poor wife had so many things happen to her youth, and horrible stuff, and it was affecting me. But everything changed years ago when I thanked God for that. I love my wife. Always have. We've been married 50 years, and that was tough to go through, but we had to thank God. What could happen? Lost partner. Lost a guy that thought just like we did. We just, great talent, and left such a big hole. And I thought about it, viewing it and when I get to heaven, I'll know. Gives more people opportunity to serve. Jason, our new deacon in our church, he stepped up to do this podcast, be the producer and director. We're trying to get it all done. But Hawkins this is what he did for a living for years. And so somebody else gets a place to serve. Music, other people are stepping up and filling the hole. School, it's tough. The kids just loved him. But, the secret of getting through life, be thankful for what comes your way, whatever it is. And how do I get that way? I just told you. You got to verbalize it. You got to realize it. You got to say, yes, I'm angry. Yes, I'm in depression. Yes, I am going through something. You verbalize it out loud. But then you got to verbalize, start thanking God for it. God, I don't know why this happened, but I'm going to thank you for it. I don't know how come I've got to go through this, but God, I'm going to thank you for it. I've going to deal here this morning with a man that just found out the other day that his cancer, he knew he had cancer in the kidney, but they've told him the other day they're going to have to remove a kidney. And it's going to be hard, but, I'm going to be there for him and care for him, and that's what we as pastors do. You say, why do you do it? It's put in the heart of me. How do you know you're a pastor? The Bible tells us you desire the work of a bishop. I desire to do what I do. I tell everybody all the time I'm doing that because people say you're 71, you need to retire, you need to go somewhere and do what you want to do. I says, I'm doing what I want to do. I do what I love, and I love what I do. So this brings me to my last point. If you're watching here today and the YouTube, this podcast, if I can be a blessing to you, I pastor a church, Tabernacle Baptist Church, I administrate a school. We have able to, if I can bless you in any way I want to, you give me a call, 916-728-5500, extension 11. Give me a call, and I'll get back to you. It might take a little bit, but I'll get back to you. And we'll have a conversation. You tell me it's emergency, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. That's all I can do, is to be there for you. We might cry together, but hopefully we come to that place of being thankful. This is the will of God concerning us. God bless you.